to the Crooked Table podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yannis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. You can find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcatchers. You can please drop us a rating or review on Apple. We really appreciate it. This episode, I am honored to welcome to the show Craig Price. Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast.
Thanks, Robert. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so tell people a little bit about who you are. It's your first time on the show, and all about Matinee Heroes.
Well, I'm a podcaster. I've been podcasting for about 9-10 years, various different things. My main thing right now is Matinee Heroes, which has been going on for about 3 years. It's myself and film critic Alan Cerny from Vital Thrills. We take a movie we love and talk about it each week. And unfortunately, a lot of people, thankfully, there's not that many podcasts like this one or Matinee Heroes where people talk about movies they love. It seems to be people talk about movies they want to break apart and rip apart or talk about ironically. But we talk about heroic movies we absolutely love and try to find lessons we can learn from the movies if we can, or just talk about the movie itself, why we love it, what's so great about the movie, what really stirs emotions from it. And so we've been doing that for 3 years, and it's been pretty successful. One of the things that it has spun off is we just wrapped up the first video stream season of a game show we do, because in the podcast, we talk about the movie, and then we recast the movie. And we recast the movie using Doctor Who rules. You can take any actor through time and space. So we do that on every episode, but when we made it into a game show, and we just wrapped up the season finale with a playoff. So we just had our playoff August 23rd. But since we record in advance, I can't tell you who won.
Yeah, no spoilers.
But it was a great 16 weeks. We had 8 competitors. We had 8 shows. The winners of each show then came to an 8-person playoff, and it was quite interesting, especially in the semifinals where we had to recast animated or Muppet movies with human beings.
Ooh. I love the Muppet side of it. I'm a big Muppet fan, so
oh yeah,
I you see that thing all the time. That meme where it's like recast a movie. What is it? You can replace the whole cast of one movie with Muppets except for one. You get to keep one person or that kind of thing.
Well, that's the hard part. I mean, that's the easy part, because whoever's the lead character is going to be Kermit. Whoever is the lead lady is going to be Miss Piggy. Going the opposite direction is more difficult. Mm-hmm. So who do you have that can be Kermit? Obviously, we're not going by just voice. It's a personality thing. So it's like, who can embody who Kermit is? He's kind, he's ambitious, he's talented, but he's also soft-spoken, and he can sometimes be a doormat, but sometimes he can get a little angry. He can sing, he can dance, he can play banjo. So finding someone like that is difficult, because I know one of them was Steve Martin. Someone had recast Steve Martin, and the other one was Stanley Tucci.
Those are actually pretty good picks. I mean, the Steve Martin one, especially, he was in the Muppet movie, so you have like a direct line, a direct connection there too.
Right, but he also has the personality, because if you've ever seen him in like Father of the Bride, or you see him in the other when he was a dad, he's got I can't
Cheaper
remember.
by the Dozen.
Cheaper by the Dozen. See, that's how you can tell the generations. I missed that one because I was probably in my 20s and I didn't really go see that. But Father of the Bride was right when I was still a teenager.
Right.
But he's got that warmth about him. He can be a jerk if he wants to be, but most of the time, Steve Martin is kind of like America's dad, who can play the banjo and be funny and be goofy, and that's Kermit. And so we kind of did that all the way through Dr. Teeth and Animal, and so I had Klaus Kinski for Animal.
Nice.
That shows you how wide we go. We go for anybody. It could be someone new, or it could be someone like Klaus Kinski, who half the people probably don't even know who we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy German dude.
I love that idea, and I love the Matinee Heroes idea, especially on this show, as you mentioned. I like focusing on the positive. I mean, everybody has their own perspective when it comes to movies. Art is obviously subjective, and everybody brings their own experience to it and all of that, which is kind of what this show is all about. So I love that you focus on more of the positive side of it instead of all right, let's tear this thing down to make ourselves feel better about what we've got going on, or just talking about the latest release. Like it's a little more, I don't know, it's a little more unexpected and personal than all of that, I guess.
Yeah, and then also you're not, especially with current releases. Never mind COVID, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. Even before that, it was difficult to get access. Then you're kind of forced to talk about a movie that you may not like.
Right.
I'd much rather sit around and talk to people who love movies because there's more energy, there's more passion. They actually know what they're talking about and they care about what they're talking about, versus someone who's just trying to find a joke or trying to find something to, stick a fork in and cause problems. Now, do I do that at some of the movies? Yes, because not every movie that Alan and I pick are mutually loved. It's more, I can tolerate that movie, so let's talk about it. But there's never a movie that either one of us outright hates. What's the point of talking about a movie you hate?
Yeah, exactly. Is there ever anything that do you rewatch the movies before you do the episodes 1 and 2? Is there ever anything where you're like, oh, I loved that as a kid, and then you watch it and you're like, oh no, this is not aged well? Like,
sure, that happens all the time, especially movies of the 80s. Because one of the other things we do, so the format of our show is, we have a guest on and we talk to the guest and talk about them, kind of what we're going to do here.
Yeah.
And then we talk about the movie for a good 30, 45 minutes, or however it goes. Sometimes it goes longer if it's a great movie and it's a long movie and we talk about it quite a bit. Then we recast it and then we double feature it. And we find a movie that matches the movie that you think would be if you had a day at the movies, what 2 movies would you watch? And sometimes you realize that you had a movie in mind for your double feature, then you watch the movie, because I always watch it a couple days before we record, and you go, oh, this is not as good as I thought. Escape from New York was something that came out, and I had not seen it. I thought I did. It's one of those movies that came out in 1981. I would have been, 8 years old. Not a movie like Indiana Jones where my parents take me to.
Exactly.
They're not going to take me to see Snake Plissken. And so that movie has been ripped off so many times by so many different movies that when I had watched it, I'm sitting there going, I don't remember any of this, but it feels like something that I remember. And then you start to see, oh, this is not what I thought it was. And it's not maybe as good as I thought it was. And so, yeah, I have that quite a bit, especially nostalgia movies that maybe when I was a kid in the 80s, I saw on a loop on HBO and now I'm like Krull. Oh God, Krull is awful. But Alan, my co-host, that's a hill he's willing to die on. And so we watched it. I hated that movie. I was watching it going, I've never seen this movie before because I'm not a big fantasy guy. And it was also seemed kind of boring. And hey, I try to watch it with an open mind because I've gone into other movies thinking the same thing, going, oh, this is fantastic. And no, Krull was garbage and it was tough. And so I try to I try not to be too mean because I can be really mean if I want to. Mm-hmm. But that's not what the show's about. So it's very rare that it happens, but this gives me a chance to see movies I haven't seen in a long time, or maybe movies I've never seen before. And that's one of the reasons I love love doing it, because just this past year. So there's some idea of what we've done. We've done Spartacus, the original, Braveheart, which is a great one. I was forced to watch the Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Now, there's a movie I did not like, but I was forced to watch it because I did an event with the Twin Peaks people.
Had you seen the show?
Oh, yeah, and I rewatched the show as well because, like I said, I had an event where I had to interview the cast reunion, right? And so I had to watch the shows so I'd get ready for this, and because we also put the audio of the panel on the show, we did Twin Peaks as a reason for it, and it was like, oh, this was not as good as I know people love it, but it's not as good as people really remember. And then we did like Enemy Mine, but then you do stuff like Into the Spider-Verse, or we did a thing about the Mandalorian in this, and it's not a movie, it's a show. We don't rarely do television, but because it's such a great new thing that is fantastic. When Disney Plus came out, we did Disney Plus movies, and I didn't watch a lot of Disney movies when I was a kid. So there's a whole bunch of things that I revisited, like Newsies. I don't like musicals, but we did a musical month in December a couple of years ago, just because you have to learn these genres, and sometimes you get surprised yourself. Like some of these movies aren't nearly as bad as I thought.
Yeah, and you have to be open. I think to be a real cinephile, you have to be open to just exploring something that seems like it's outside of your wheelhouse, like a musical or whatever. Just to kind of be well-rounded. I think it changes your appreciation and view of cinema in general when you expose yourself to those other projects that you ordinarily would just snub your nose at and that kind of thing.
Well, it also informs you of the culture of other movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So like Escape from New York, not a movie I like that much, but as I'm watching it, I'm seeing how it has influenced the entire 80s. You know, this whole thing of a guy, one guy wrecking crew going into this, because like the Warriors are based on it. You could see influences when Blade Runner, a lot of this dystopian stuff that happens in the 80s was perfect. And it all came from this John Carpenter movie. It's just one of those things you've got to understand. It's like almost like archaeology. Look at that segue.
Oh,
it's almost like film archaeology where you're going back in time and you're seeing where the bones of the movies you love come from.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Escape from New York, which, as you said, came out in 1981, just like Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, before we get into the film itself, what is kind of your experience with the Indiana Jones franchise? I guess post Raiders, where does it sit in your pantheon of matinee heroes, to segue back to your show, and as far as like your favorite series and that kind of thing?
That Raiders of the Lost Ark is my favorite movie. So when you offered up, well, you can pick the movie. I'm like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, because I'm going to be able to pick, because I wanted Raiders of the Lost Ark and you hadn't done it yet. And I'm like, okay, that's strange, because it's such a great overall movie. But I grew up, my birthday's in August. I'm going to be 47. And I was like 8 years old when this came out. And that means at 8 years old, and my dad and my mom were willing to take me to this movie, because it's a kind of a violent movie for an 8-year-old in the 80s. Mm-hmm. But it's not that bad. It's especially nowadays. Nowadays, it's nothing. I mean, I think they play it unedited on CBS. So it's
probably, yeah.
I think they bleep out the one word, because I remember that watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, then we and my brothers and my friends were all out in the woods playing with ropes, with whips and stuff, and all that cool stuff. I remember in the fourth grade, in 1985, when the Laserdisc came out, my fourth grade class watched it, and they even made a big deal about, well, they're going to say shit in a second, but that's it. And it's true. It's, if you can get past the violence, there's that one word that might be objectionable to some parents, but that is something everybody loved. We just lost our minds when they played that at school, because we'd seen it. And then we're like, we don't have to do work. And it was like the last week of school, and it was warm outside, and we're like, we'll just roll in the TV, get the Laserdisc booted up, and bam, you watch the first side. Tomorrow we're going to flip the big old disc and we'll watch the second side. And 2 days of Indiana Jones in class. He hit right when everything that a kid wants. You're out playing. So what are you going to play? Well, I'm going to play, let's beat up Nazis. I'm climbing on rocks. I'm outside swinging from ropes. I'm climbing trees and trying to dodge imaginary boulders and running away from villagers that are attacking us because I stole their golden idol.
Right.
And then all my friends loved it. My brother loved it, who's 5 years older than me. My dad loved it. So it was so universal and it was so available to everybody that it was just the greatest thing in the world. And then you get the Temple of Doom, and they put a proxy in for me because Short Round is the same age as me.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, I'm playing in the woods, and then I go to the movies, and there's a kid just like me having adventures with Indiana Jones. Oh, my God. So you can see that the hooks went in deep with Indiana Jones, especially the timing. Now, that may not be for everybody else because a lot of people watch it on tape later on, or they watch it in DVDs when they're older. But if you were a kid at that age range, it's very difficult to find too many male adults who don't absolutely adore Raiders of the Lost Ark because it was just their evolution of them growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much of it, I think, is about that, about when you see a movie, what formative age you are and that kind of thing. Because my experience with this movie, I saw this as a kid a million years ago, and then saw the sequels sporadically, but I didn't really rewatch Raiders a lot as a kid. I actually saw probably Last Crusade more because we had that on VHS, but I was born in 83. So I sort of was more age appropriate for when Last Crusade came out. And then didn't really rewatching Raiders, I didn't really have that same connection because it wasn't as much of a part of my childhood in the same way. And it's become such an iconic movie, and sort of like you were saying about Escape from New York, that you watch it now and you're like, oh, is this where every other movie in the last 30 years got that trope from or whatever? It's just been like, I was watching it with my wife last night, and I just kept writing, like making notes, like, oh, that's an iconic moment. And that's this thing that's been parodied a bazillion times. And it's one of those films that even though I haven't seen it a whole lot in my life, like I think probably the last time I saw it all the way through was a couple decades ago, that it felt like I had seen it so much just because it's permeated the culture in such a crazy way. And as far as the violence, I mean, this was PG when it came out and almost got an R because there was no PG-13 at that point because of the head exploding thing.
Right. And they put a little bit more fire. That
Exactly.
shows you how stupid it is, the rating system is, because they put a little bit more fire over it, but yet you can still clearly see his head explode. It's almost like scanners.
And the MPA is like, that's fine. It's good. All right, you can't see it as much. I'm like, all right, sure.
Well, the trick a lot of directors do is they know it's going to be violent, they'll make it even more violent, knowing that the MPA is going to say, hey, this is too violent, cut it down. And so they'll edit it the way they wanted to, and they'll go, oh, well, you made the changes, it's approved. And it's like, you idiots. I know of I can't remember the name of the actual movie, but I've known directors who have said, I've just simply resubmitted the film again a few weeks later, and they had forgotten, and it's so arbitrary and weird. They had passed it through. So whatever their problem was before, this time it wasn't. So it's,
Yeah, or especially with the violence, like in American cinema in general, like you show a breast or say more than 2 F-bombs, automatic R, but shooting, violence, explosions, that's fine, whatever. Right. I don't understand that logic whatsoever, but okay.
No, because we're prudes, but now I will say the Temple of Doom, the yanking the heart out was a bit too far. And that's one of the movies that was the impetus for PG-13. It wasn't one that was going to be PG. It was that in Gremlins when people went, this one is just too much, but it's not R. I can understand that, but Raiders, like I said, nowadays you could easily watch this and all they have to do is change one word. And maybe, they do say Scheisse, which is German for shit. You just change a couple of words that most people wouldn't even notice. You're ready to go. There's very little you have to change for this movie to be acceptable for a wide audience. It's ridiculous how accessible this movie is and how many people from all ranges. Because the reason my dad loves it is my dad is a kid of the 40s and 50s, and he used to go to the movies for 10 cents and spend all day there, and they'd have cereals like this ahead of his movies. And and I love it because this is great. And if you have kids, I know this is just a fun, great adventure, because the great thing is it's set in the past, so it doesn't have to seem like it's up to date every time. That's why I think period movies do a lot better on the rewatch, because it's already set in the past. So anything that's set in the past, you don't have to go, well, why don't they have a cell phone? This would fix everything. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think people sometimes maybe forget how closely this kind of started the idea for this movie basically came from a very similar place as Star Wars. Obviously, both George Lucas creations, both sort of throwbacks to the old serials. Like it's Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon type of deal. And I think that that was kind of the idea with Star Wars as well. The long time ago in the galaxy far, far away, there's a certain timelessness to these movies that, like you said, I think makes it, you can watch it 30 years from now and it's still as relevant or as it is now, basically. And it's, so what is your thoughts on the sequels? You mentioned Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, Crystal Skull, and you sort of gave me a little bit of a hint of how you feel about this. And do you want to see a 5th one?
Each Indiana Jones sequel is its own genre movie. So Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, is a perfect movie in every aspect. It was nominated for Best Picture. It deserves to be up there because anybody can watch it. It's an action movie, yes, but it's a pure cinema experience. Then Temple of Doom, they wanted a little darker. So it was actually a horror movie as far as Steven Spielberg was concerned. He was going to make, that's why there's people's hearts being ripped out, kids getting whipped. It's, there's a lot of, they're eating snakes and weird things coming out and foods like that. So the scares were supposed to be there. There was a backlash because they thought it was going to be a fun-loving Indiana Jones movie, and it still was, but it was a little too dark for a lot of people. So they went the exact opposite, and they made The Last Crusade, which is a great movie, kind of a buddy cop comedy, where you got the dad, Sean Connery, who's only 12 years older than Harrison Ford. But let's be honest, 12-year-old Sean Connery could possibly have conceived a child of Harrison Ford. I mean, not everybody can say that at 12.
That's a good point. 12-year-old Sean Connery is more manly than I'll ever be, probably.
Exactly. Oh, I just saw Call of the Wild with Harrison Ford.
Oh, yeah.
He's 70. He was 77 when he did that. And he's in, there's a scene with him with his shirt off. And I'm like, he's in better shape at 78 than I've ever been in my life, because it's never going to get better, because I'm already on the downslope. And it's kind of depressing how great shape he's in. But the Sean Connery's the same way up until, because Sean Connery's like 80, 83, 80. Well, let's see, 78. He's almost 90.
Yeah, he is.
Now, he's 90, so he's not really as buff. But up until he was 85, he was still pretty flexible and pretty manly.
Yeah,
so I can imagine what he was like at 12.
And I think that's a big, we'll get in, we still have to queue up the trailer and get to the actual movie. But I think, that's a big part. Harrison Ford is the reason that these movies work as well as they did. I mean, because he has that, as we were saying, that sort of masculine presence, but he's just that classic movie star charisma about him that he can carry all those different genres kind of in equal measure.
Well, Lucas and Spielberg actually told their casting director, find me a Harrison Ford type.
Yeah. They
didn't want to use Harrison Ford because George Lucas didn't want to have a situation where everybody thought that every movie he does is going to have Harrison Ford in it, kind of like De Niro and Scorsese. And in fact, they only had him in there at the last minute because of Tom Selleck was supposed to do it, and CBS won't let him out of his contract. Let's go with if we're looking for a Harrison Ford type, let's just get Harrison. He's going to be great. And then Harrison came in and boom, and it's an icon is created. And this is Harrison Ford's role. When he dies, they're going to say Indiana Jones passed. They're not going to say Han Solo. They're going to say leading man or megastar, but Indiana Jones is the picture they're probably going to use. He is Indiana Jones. And to remake it with somebody else, I'm okay with it, but they're going to have to be a Harrison Ford type. You're not going to be able to kind of change it a little bit and make him, let's make him a little more nerdy because he's a professor. No, you've got to have a man's man in there but also someone who can be smart. And I don't envy anybody who has to take his spot, but I think there's some people out there that could.
Well, you mentioned earlier about how you have all this recasting experience. So is there anyone that you can think of now that would let's say tomorrow Lucasfilm or Disney releases a statement, all right, we're still going to do Indiana Jones 5, but it's going to be, younger Indiana Jones or whatever. And Harrison will, bookend the story. Who would you cast as maybe around the age he is in Raiders, maybe, a few years earlier or whatever.
Well, I mean, the names that I'm going to say are not original. They've been floated out there. And the number one is Chris Pratt. Because I think Chris Pratt has the attitude. Because he's a little sarcastic. He's in great shape. He can do all that stuff. He's kind of doing that now in Jurassic Park movies.
Yeah, that's true.
He's kind of stealing the Indiana Jones. Instead of being an archaeologist, he's a zoologist. And the other one that I really like, and he's growing on me every time I see him, is Chris Pine. The more I see Chris Pine, the more he does, the more I really like what he does. And I think he could fit that too, especially when he's in Wonder Woman. I think that personality would be perfect for an Indiana Jones type. And he can do obviously he's in great shape. He can sign for a 5-picture deal. Those two guys, the two Chris's, I would easily see those two guys do that.
Yeah. The Pratt connection is also kind of ironic or fitting too, because he's basically playing a Han Solo type in the Guardians movies as well. So he's kind of tapping into a lot of that.
Yeah, he's kind of a dumb Han Solo. I mean, not that Han Solo is the smartest guy in the world, but Peter Lord is pretty stupid.
Yeah, okay, it's fair enough. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I don't know what the sense is of having 80-year-old Harrison Ford trying to. I mean, we already got our for lack of a better term, old Indiana Jones movie in 2008, and most people generally regard that as the weakest of the franchise, and I think rightfully so.
Well, I don't think that was Harrison Ford's fault, though.
No, not at all.
Because that's the thing is, you see Harrison Ford and from the 90s, pretty much from right after Regarding Henry. So Regarding Henry he took a risk. Mosquito Coast and Regarding Henry back to back were risks that he took that were art movies that didn't do well. And he's like, I'm never doing that again. And so we lost the witness Harrison Ford. We lost the actor Harrison Ford, and we got the action hero Harrison Ford, which is great because he was good in The Fugitive and he was good at What Lies Beneath. But most of the movies from the 90s and the early 2000s, it felt like they were check movies where he's just doing it for a check.
Mm-hmm.
And then recently, the last couple movies that he's done, you start to see the re-engaged Harrison Ford. I mean, he was plugged back in for The Force Awakens. Seeing him as Han Solo again, and he wasn't phoning it in, was fantastic. He rechecked in Blade Runner 2049. You know, you could see that he was excited to be there and happy to be there. The Call of the Wild, I love that movie. I think that movie's great for him because he's playing a grumpy old man, and that's what he is.
Yeah, easy. No acting required.
And he was engaged in The Crystal Skull, but The Crystal Skull, now that genre is a B movie from the 50s. It's trying to be a science fiction B movie. And they kind of lost what all the fun stuff of Indiana Jones was about. And I think George Lucas was still stuck on the Phantom Menace, the prequels technology. So there was a lot of CGI green screen going on that they didn't need to do. That's the great thing about these movies is there's so much practical effects. Mm-hmm. That when you see someone actually do it, it makes a big difference versus having, Shia LaBeouf with CGI monkeys.
With the monkeys, yeah.
Yeah. Geez. And that's the other thing is they were trying to pass the torch to Shia LaBeouf. And I didn't think that was a good story to tell. I think that's a story you can tell. I just don't think that story was a good story to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I bring up how the fifth one would be kind of old Indy is that I feel like Crystal Skull was their chance to do that story and they botched it, and it's like now it's too late. It's like with the we talked before the call about the X-Men friend New Mutants trying to come out. It's like them trying to do Dark Phoenix again. It's like you did it, you tried it, it didn't work, and you tried it again and it still didn't work. So it's like I don't know. I just feel like it's better that you're just going to damage the brand. Like it's more than by trying to do that than just giving it a little space and like Batman Beginsing it.
Well, speaking of Batman, I was hoping they would do something like they're doing with Batman. So the Robert Pattinson Batman is supposed to be much more cerebral. He's supposed to be the world's greatest detective in this movie. So they're making that movie because that's the reputation of Batman. Not only is he a billionaire, but he's supposed to be one of the smartest people in the world who creates all these gadgets. And we never really see that in any of the Batman movies. We see that he's a smart guy, but he's not like super insane genius. He's just he's smarter than the average bear, and he's in good shape, and he's got billions of dollars, and he somehow buys technology from wherever the places are. I mean, that's what Morgan Freeman was saying, is how they would buy 100,000 pieces of this equipment so they could smuggle in the 5 pieces for you, Batman.
Right.
But Batman himself, the actual comic book and the actual character, is the world's greatest detective, and he's mostly about thinking. And I wish they had done that with Indiana Jones because he's old. He's too old to be swinging. It was fun to see him at that beginning part where he's swinging to the Area 51 warehouse, but at some point you're like, no, he can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And if they had gone with he is a professor who's an archaeologist and he's unlocking these clever traps or something versus him still having to punch Nazis, or in this case, Russians, I think they went out. I think you're right. They went about it the wrong way. They should have focused more on his smarts versus his brawn, because at 70, he'll be, if they're supposed to start, they were supposed to start this year, but they're not. Obviously, it's been pushed back. He'll be 79 next July. So when it comes out, he'll be 80, 81. I mean, not that he can't do it, but what can he do?
Right.
I mean, I just think even if they use stunt doubles, it's still not going to be believable enough. You have to make Indiana Jones age up. And they tried to keep Indiana Jones 35 to 45, and you can't do that, no matter how great shape Harrison Ford's in.
And the impact of these movies is so large that any Indiana Jones movie they try to do now is probably going to feel like it's a parody of what an Indiana Jones movie is, because it's been, the Mummy, the 1999 Mummy, is basically an Indiana Jones. Like you said, Jurassic World, that character is. And Indiana Jones has become a type of character now. Even if you look at, when you mentioned him just being cerebral and solving puzzles and that kind of thing, it reminded me of this is actually something my wife brought up while we were watching the movie last night, the Da Vinci Code and like that franchise, which I'm not a fan of, but like that kind of deal, like making him like a Robert Langdon figure.
Yeah, and Laura Croft is the female Indiana Jones.
Exactly.
So and then we got Romancing the Stone, where Michael Douglas tried to be a type of Indiana Jones. We had Alan Quartermain, where we had Richard Chamberlain trying to be an Indiana Jones. So many ripoffs came out in the 80s after this. And a lot of the guy, you need to have a personality of Harrison Ford. I mean, he's the driving force of all of these movies. And it is such a Harrison Ford creation that it is going to be tough. They're going to have really knock it out of the park if they do an Indiana Jones movie with or without him. Because if they do it with him, it's going to have to be so good, it's going to have to erase the memory of Crystal Skull for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if a trailer can do that. I think it's going to have to be a word of mouth situation. And because otherwise that movie's not going to do well just on principle. It's like, I'm not going to go see it because the last one sucked.
Right. Exactly.
But hopefully they'll do one. It'll do great, or it'll be a good movie. It may, however it does in the box office, inconsequential, but it's a good movie. Then people will be ready. That's why Force Awakens, was such a good thing, is that it kind of reset everybody and reminded people why they love Star Wars. Because the prequels kind of, everybody was like, I don't really, unless you were 9 when the prequels came out.
Right.
That reset things. Now, did they stick the landing on that particular series? No, but they certainly were smart into kind of redo Star Wars for The Force Awakens. It was a note by note ripoff,
pretty much.
But they kind of had to reintroduce people why they love it, because they really hadn't had a good Star Wars movie since 1983.
Well, plus that was the one it was still a sequel to Return of the Jedi. Those, story wise, it's picking up from that point too. So right. you get able to get 70-something-year-old Harrison Ford to come out there and be like, hey, the Jedi and all that, it's real. We're back. It's serious this time. And, put asses in seats. And I think it's going to be hard for them to pull a Force Awakens or a Blade Runner 2049 for this, Indiana Jones at this point in Ford's career, since he already did that, is what I keep going back to. It's like, you don't get a second chance at, hey, whatever happened to Indiana Jones decades ago.
I'm not going to say you don't, because it's Harrison Ford. I think Harrison Ford's, he gets second, third chances. Because every time you think he's kind of checked out, he comes back with A Fugitive. Oh, that's an amazing movie. Then he was checked out for a little bit. We got 6 days and 7 nights, and we got garbage like that. Then Air Force One reminded us how how awesome he is. So he will, every once in a while he'll come back. So it's like James Cameron. I don't really care about Avatar. I don't think a lot of people even remember it very much, but I'm not going to bet against him, because every time that you do, they bet against him with Titanic, they bet against him in Avatar, and he has killed it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely killed it. And I think he's going to kill it again with whatever he does with Avatar 2, 3, 6, 28, and 90. He's doing like 50 of them at once.
I know. That's the part that worries me. Not you want to do a sequel to Avatar. That's great. The fact that you're planning 4 of them at once, I'm just like, oh boy, one at a time, James, or maybe 2 to do a trilogy. But
I don't know what pictures he's got of what executive doing whatever, but I think it was Fox going, hey, we're getting sold to Disney. They're going to have to do this. Let's forget it. Just let's do it. I think they just it was like a fire sale. It's like, you want a 5-picture deal? You got it. You want a 5-picture deal? You got it. And then they go, well, we're going to sell this to Disney in about 6 months. So you go right ahead.
Jeez. And I think in that case, I think it's the fact that, I don't really care about an Avatar 2, 3, 4, any of them. But I have a feeling he'll make us care when it's time. And the question is whether Indiana Jones 5 can do that. And one real last question, then I swear we're going to get to Raiders. But this is all relevant, so it's good. How do you feel about James Mangold taking over as director and not having... Okay.
I was just about to say that we've got someone who knows what they're doing.
Yes.
Old man Logan, and he did that Logan movie. That was fantastic. And they did it the right way. They're like, we're going to end it. This is it. I think he understood what you had to do to focus on. You had to focus on his relationship with Charles Xavier and his relationship with this new kid. Because he is supposedly immortal and he just wants to finally die because he's just tired of it. And it was fantastic. And knowing that he's taking over gives me hope. Can he land I don't know, but it's certainly, he's got a good record and I'm willing to go with that. I don't want to see another, what was his name? David Cope, or whoever that, I'm tired of seeing him destroy franchises.
Yeah, maybe he'll make the next Indiana Jones this super dark, R-rated, and he'll just call it Indy. The Logan approach to it.
Jones. That's all it's going to be.
There you go.
Jones. And it'll be super dark. It'll be him taking on a Satanist cult of some sort. And he'll have to die at the end to save Marion, save somebody, just to save the world, whatever. But doing what he did in Force Awakens might be okay too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's crazy because I think that a lot of people had initially pegged J.J. Abrams as kind of the next Spielberg, but I think James Mangold's a lot. Yeah, see, I don't agree with that either. And I'm a Star Wars fan. I actually grew up with Star Wars more than Indiana Jones. And I think that's just because of this, it kind of resurged right around the right time for me. And I actually like The Force Awakens, even though recognizing that it's a remake. But everything else he's done has just been kind of an imitation of someone else. And I feel like Mangold is able to sort of nail genres in just the perfect way that makes it feel true to whatever the material is, but also brings his own spin on them, like Ford v Ferrari and Logan and 310 to Yuma, which is a remake, but still, like he understands how to adapt his style for different material. And I think it's a really smart choice. That's the only probably silver lining that makes me be like, oh, well, maybe that Indiana Jones movie, the fifth one, is actually going to be really good. We'll see.
Yeah. For me, J.J. Abrams is a Spielberg impersonator. He doesn't do anything original. He did this with Lost. It's this mystery box thing that he keeps talking about. The problem with the mystery box, and it's just like if you buy a crappy mystery box at a convention or online, if you open it up, because you can talk about it, what could possibly be in it, building all this hype for it, and you finally open up the mystery box and it's a bunch of pencils and a rubber stopper, people are going to be mad.
Who asked for this? Yeah.
That's why people got so mad at Lost, because they really didn't. It was like season 3 or 4, or maybe 3 and 4 were just filler to keep the show going until they figured out what the end was, because they didn't have an end in sight.
Right.
And it turned off a lot of people. And he does that all the time. Super 8 was the same thing. I was like, oh, we're super excited. Cloverfield, super excited. He can start. He's a good starter. J.J. Abrams is a good starter. He is not a closer.
Right. And Super 8 is essentially him being like, look, I can make, Close Encounters meets E.T. or whatever, the Amblin style thing. And
look, lens flares. I can do lens flares. I can do Star Trek just like Star Wars. That's basically what he's doing.
Oh, man. So, yeah, James Mangold, I think, if anyone could bring it back, I think that's a pretty good choice. But we should probably move into Raiders. It's all about the franchise, so it's all good. So, obviously, this episode, we're going to talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981. Let's listen to a little bit of the trailer right now.
For nearly 3,000 years, man has searched for the Lost Ark of the Covenant.
The Bible speaks of the Ark leveling mountains and laying waste to entire regions. Not something to be taken lightly. No one knows its secrets.
Jones, do you realize what the Ark is? It's a transmitter. It's a radio for speaking to God.
An army which carries the Ark before it is invincible.
The Ark, if it is their Eternis, then it is something that man was not meant to disturb.
It is protected by forces beyond imagination. It is desired above all treasures on earth by those who are good, trust me, and those who are evil.
I'll tell you everything.
Yes, I know you will.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That was a little bit of the trailer for Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981, directed by some guy named Steven Spielberg. So, Craig, we sort of talked about this franchise a lot already. What is it particularly? I'm trying to think where we want to cover now that we've touched on so much about the movie in the preamble. So, yeah, go ahead, take it away.
Let's start with Spielberg. This movie saved Spielberg's reputation because this was a movie after 1941. 1941 was a massive bomb. It was a comedy. It was based in 1941. And, it had, John Belushi. It had Dan Aykroyd. It had a bunch of people in it. And it was not good. And it was expensive. The movie before that, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, was horribly expensive. Spielberg and Jaws. Jaws is one of the most famous failures in the history of the world. Because if you talk about it as it is, it's a movie that tripled its budget and tripled its schedule. That is not a success. Mm-hmm. It's only because he was able to manipulate things on the fly and improvise. That movie's mostly improvised. They were writing pages for it the night before because the stupid shark didn't work. But his reputation was, if you hire Steven Spielberg, you better fudge the numbers because he is going to go over budget and he's going to go over time. And time is money, and that's a big deal when you make a movie. It doesn't matter how great you are. If you're making Citizen Kane over and over again, but yet you're tripling your budget, no one's going to touch you. And I think that's the problem. The Wachowski twins are not twins. The sisters have, right. Is that they make these big $100-200 million movies that not a lot of mainstream people go see. I'm not saying the movies aren't good. I'm just saying they don't draw in massive crowds. The Matrix was one. That's definitely something they did. But, Speed Racer tanked. Cloud Atlas, everyone seems to like that movie, but nobody went to go pay money for it.
I did. I'll put my hand
I saw
up
it
for
too, and I'm not a big Cloud Atlas fan, but I do know that movie could not have been made for less than $150 million. Right.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But that was not a $150 million movie for the nationwide that people want to see. And so Spielberg was in a situation where he probably only had one or two more movies in him. Then his reputation would have been ruined, regardless of how much acclaim he'd gotten. So the deal with Lucas would produce this movie because they were talking about this on the beach in Hawaii. Very famous story about they were talking about on the beach in Hawaii, and they wanted to make American James Bond without all the hardware or a serial kind of movie. So they had this idea going along, and Lucas said, I'll produce it, but you have to do it for the amount of money we talk about, and it has to be done on the time frame. Otherwise, I can't work with you. And that's his friend.
Yeah.
And I think this is a movie that really reset the mindset of Steven Spielberg, who I think he might have just got a little full of himself and thought he was the golden child, because Jaws went over budget and Jaws went over schedule, and it became the biggest movie of all time at that time. Same thing with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was a massive success despite the fact of all the problems. So he was getting a little full of himself. And if Raiders hadn't done well, especially since it was under budget and on time, it taught him how to do movies correctly. And because that was such a huge success for him, and he did it where he did have to, cut corners and shoot things differently and remove scenes and really streamline it. I think it helped his entire career moving forward, that now I can be someone that studios can depend on and know that they're going to get a hit, they're going to get quality, and it's going to be under budget. And a lot of people who love movies forget that part of it. It's the business part. A lot of people focus on the show, but you got to focus on the business. Otherwise, these movies don't get made.
Yeah, it's true. When you put it in that context, it really is the one that established what a Spielberg, what it means to have Spielberg's name on a poster, like that, because he basically operates in two settings for the most of his career, the prestige movie and then the popcorn movie, like, classic 97, The Lost World and Amistad, or,
1992,
93, yeah.
List and Jurassic
Park. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that it's really where he's fine tunes. All right, how do I lock that blockbuster position in place? And I think this is the movie that really does that, because it like you said, it encompasses all those elements. It has the comedy, it has the action, it has like the suspense and all that other stuff. And it gives you the full package in the way that Jurassic Park kind of does, in the way that I feel like Minority Report kind of does, and some of his other films that fit in that wheelhouse. And it is, I think, a big part of it comes from the fact that this character is part, series, like 1940s serials. He's part James Bond. He's part superhero in a way, because he kind of has a secret identity. So I think it fits that.
But he's not invincible. That's the key thing about Indiana Jones, and he leads the way. You can connect the dots directly from Indiana Jones to John McClane, Die Hard,
100,
where
100%.
You've got a main character who, unlike James Bond kind of just sachets through, fight scenes and machine guns and lasers and all kinds of stuff, looking cool in a tuxedo and saying quippy puns and has a beautiful woman on his arm, where Indiana Jones gets punched in the face by ex-girlfriends. He gets thrown into holes. He gets beaten up to the point where he's going to die. And if it wasn't for the fact that this, what they call a flying wing, if it hadn't have been rotating the right way, he probably would have gotten his ass handed to him and died. But instead, the big German guy got his face chopped off. And then, of course, the big thing that everyone brings up now, because it happened in The Big Bang Theory, where they talk about, well, if Indiana Jones didn't exist, everything in that movie would have happened the same way. But that's not what the movie's about.
Right.
So he is not a guy that is he is super powered in certain ways, because he's extremely lucky. That's where he is. He's extremely lucky. He gets, shot at. He hurts like we do. That amazing scene in the submarine or on the boat with Chakanda, with Marion, and she's like, "Ow, that hurts." Ooh,
Mm-hmm.
Well, where doesn't hurt? Here and here, and it's a character moment, but it also shows you that he's just like us, except he's maybe he's a little braver than we are. Maybe he's just living a different life than we are, but he seems like a regular guy.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, which a lot of once you start seeing action heroes in the 80s, no more regular guys. This is the non-steroid, amazing 80s guy. Because other than that, you have Rambo, you got Arnold Schwarzenegger, you got these guys that bulge. And Harrison Ford doesn't bulge. He seems like a regular guy. He's a good-looking guy, but he's like a good-looking average guy. He's like Bradley Cooper.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good comparison. No, there is that aspirational level to him, and you mentioned that scene that I was just about to quote about it's not the years, it's the mileage, classic line, which apparently was improv. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yep, I guess it is. Yeah, if nothing else, he gets hurt, and he's scared of snakes, just like we are. So you have that other element, sort of humanizing him,
and he makes mistakes. And he, nowadays he would definitely not be, he'd be a Me Too guy, because his romance with Marion, she was underage at the time when they first met. That's what the whole point is, that she's only 25 in the movie, and they dated 10 years ago. That's,
do they establish her age in the movie? Because I was looking for that, because I'd heard that.
Well, she's supposed to be about 25. She's supposed to be, but in a decade ago, she was just a kid.
Right.
So she'd be about 15. And, that's more of a character flaw. I mean, it's definitely inappropriate, but that's the point. It was inappropriate. Now, did they actually have feelings for each other? Maybe. I mean, obviously they get married in The Crystal Skull, spoiler alert. But, that's the other key thing that this movie's so great about, is that we have a heroine that doesn't need to be rescued, even though she does need to be rescued at times, but that she can take care of herself most of the time. Mm-hmm. Which she's not Willie Scott, who's screaming constantly, which is a character from the 30s. It's not Kate Capshaw doing a bad job. She's perfectly doing an archetype from the 30s. I get so upset when people tell me that they don't like Willie Scott because they miss the point of Willie Scott.
Right.
She's supposed to be annoying.
I think Marion set the bar too high. I think as far as having strong female action hero figures and in this movie. And then that's why Willie Scott, everybody was like, all right, she's going to be just like Marion or just as strong. And they're like, whoa, no, none at all.
And then they combine the two with Ilsa in The Last Crusade, where you've got a strong woman who is bad.
That's more of the Bond thing, I think, coming into play there. That feels like more of a James Bond femme fatale.
And that was on purpose too, because if you're going to have a dad, if you're going to have American James Bond, who's his dad going to be? The original James Bond. And then you've got a guy who can, you got James Bond Sr. who's the other man? I was the other man. Wow. That's something you can buy with those two.
Yeah, 100%. That's really true. I wanted to talk about also, we talked about a lot of aspects of the character, but I think also the fact that he's a cynic is not only an easy transition from Han Solo, who similarly is like, I don't believe in this Force stuff. And here he's like, magic, supernatural. So what are you trying to scare me? That kind of thing. I think that makes this character sort of a perfect fit for Han Solo, but then also, as us coming into the movie, not believing that kind of thing either. I think that gives that character somewhat of an arc. If there is such a thing in this, do you think that there is a character arc for Indy in this? And
absolutely. So yeah. The problem is they didn't repeat that arc. So we have a guy who's a non-believer, and when shown absolute proof of the power of God, throughout this whole movie, that's what this is all about, is about the power of God is beyond science. There are things in the world that even, scientists, which archaeologists can be considered a scientist, cannot prove. At some point, you have to go on some things on faith. And Indiana Jones learns that through this movie. That's his journey, is him. It's a religious movie about him learning his faith, maybe even coming back to his faith. But the problem is, then they make the next movie. And the next movie is a different religion with other absolute proof of this other religion working. And it shows that he didn't learn anything. Because Temple of Doom is a prequel.
Yeah, technically.
Yeah, it's a prequel. So it's supposed to have happened before Raiders of the Lost Ark. You would think after going through that, having seen someone's heart pulled out of their chest, and him almost having his heart in him, he would be a lot more in the belief section starting of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's not. Even in Last Crusade, he's still not a believer at the beginning of that movie, but it's the same arc. With undeniable proof, he then has to, on faith, leap from the lion's head and hope that the cup of Christ will heal his father. Because there's no proof of evidence of that besides myths. But that's the problem with the Indiana Jones movies, is at the beginning, he's a non-believer. At the end, he's a believer. And if you're going to continuation that means he didn't learn anything if the next movie he starts off as a non-believer.
Yeah, he finishes an adventure, walks away, bumps his head, and immediately forgets everything that just happened, I guess.
Yeah.
I always wondered, is there any reason why they just made Temple of Doom a prequel? Couldn't it have just easily been set after this? What is the rationale for that, as someone who's less informed on the Indiana Jones?
You know what? I don't know. I think they just wanted to show that Indiana Jones had been having adventures all along. And so they were just going back. I think they might have wanted to deal with the time frame as well, because starting in 1940s, and I am not a historian, so this is not, but I believe through my Doctor Who knowledge, in the 40s, in the 50s, as we continue the journey of Indiana Jones, outside of World War II, I believe that's when India and Pakistan divided. And so the British influence was not as deep. And they were really going for the Shankara stone Indian myth. So they had to move it back to the point where the British were actually in control of India. And I don't believe they were in the late 40s, early 50s.
That feels like something they could have probably fudged and no one would have asked.
I don't know.
It would have avoided this issue.
I don't think so, because I think at that time, so many people, you have to realize this would have been 4.
Yeah.
Well, it's only 40 years later. It's not like it's not 100 years later. So I think a lot of people know what was going on in the 50s. Now you could do something in the 50s and people wouldn't know because it's 70 years later. It's a bit, the time frame was too close. And then they went back to Nazis with his dad because it works. It's just like, well, just what worked in the first movie, let's get back to what people love. And then they made it a little more slapsticky, funny, which wasn't bad. They did it in a good way. Bringing in Sean Connery was perfect. And so that dynamic worked. It could have bombed, but thankfully it worked. I think Salah was the worst. He got the worst of it in The Last Crusade. He went from an amazing, accomplished digger of Egypt to some goofy buffoon that doesn't know his ass from his elbow in The Last Crusade.
Yeah, that's true.
So did Marcus Brody. Marcus Brody went to be an idiot as well. So they really did a disservice with those characters in The Last Crusade for the sake of comedy.
Yeah, I can see that. They're I think really strong additions to this film, and I think this is a good sort of jumping off point to the rest of the supporting cast. So obviously, Karen Allen, we mentioned how great she is in this movie.
You know how many kids, young men, hit puberty watching Raiders of the Lost Ark because she's not the typical glamorous blonde-haired, blue-eyed starlet, but she is this gorgeous girl next door tomboy that you kind of really want to have versus I got this hot lady on my arm, big deal. That looks great for a little bit, but like I tell everybody, it doesn't matter how great you look, someone is sick of your shit. But if you have a Marion who is smart and tough and can drink big guys on the table,
what a great introduction for her.
Fantastic, because it shows you that we're not dealing with a typical Hollywood female. We're dealing with an actual person who has attributes that are going to come in useful later on. She's not just there to be rescued. She is there. She's his goddamn partner. She says it in the movie, and it was great. And it's that kind of person you didn't see a lot of back then. Now they're all over the place. They're great. That's great. You want to see more. But now, back then, that was a revelation, and people tried desperately to try to find something else like that, and always missed out. I don't know if it's Karen Allen or it's the way she'd portrayed it, or it's just the writing. It's just no one's ever quite gotten it until recently how to write women.
I think it's a testament to the fact that this franchise didn't have another strong female character like that until they just went back to Marion for the fourth one. And I think that's one of the things that one of the elements of Crystal Skull that pretty much everyone can agree on. Good move bringing Karen Allen back into it.
Yes, a good move. But again, they made her a little bit too lovelorn. She was there. Not to say she's a gold digger, but she is there just to get married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wish if she had been Marion, and I don't feel like she was Marion. I felt that she was like a spinster who couldn't wait to get married. I don't know, who was pining over Indiana Jones this whole time. I don't think she would have done that. I would have liked to seen the old Marion back, just aged appropriately, matured, and still had fallen back in love with Indy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I think, well, I mean, I wasn't saying the story. It was great. Having her back in the fold was a smart move.
Absolutely. 100%. I just think they misused her. Yeah.
It's also fun in this movie too, because she is such a strong character in a genre that doesn't normally have female characters with this much agency, with this much intelligence, who can hold their own against the male, villains or heroes. This movie tries to kind of put her in the damsel in distress thing. She gets kidnapped by Belloc, and even then, like, the movie's trying to fit her in this little, put a round peg in a square hole kind of thing. So you're trying to put her in this role, and even then, she's trying to finagle her way out of it. I thought
she almost did.
She's very close.
I mean, if it was just timing, if she had done that 20 minutes earlier, the Toto wouldn't have come in. Tote wouldn't have come in, and she would have been able to escape, because she had Belloc drunk. Mm-hmm. And that was a great setup of that initial scene of her in Nepal drinking people under the table, you knew that she was not gonna little tiny Belloc. No way. I like Paul Freeman, but he's not going to be able to drink her under the table if that big guy wasn't. So it was a great setup. It was a great payoff. It's just that just like Indiana Jones, a lot of it's all timing, and he always just missed. The Ark was always getting on a plane. It was getting on a submarine. He was just missed it.
His superpower is luck, kind of like what's her name, Domino in the Deadpool. But the script is so tightly written and constructed. I mean, you just mentioned, I had a note about setup payoff, that every little detail that is mentioned earlier in this film comes back around in some way, shape, or form. The illustration with the power of God shooting out of it, which obviously we see much more graphically later on. The thing with the snakes, every little, it's just so, it's one of those movies that there's a reason why it has inspired so many imitators, why every studio executive under the sun was anxious to get like a jungle set adventure with an Indiana Jones character in production after this came out.
Absolutely. And it's also easier to make than Star Wars, because we just go to Hawaii and shoot in the jungle. A lot of the times, especially in those old serials in the 30s, you just go to Southern California in the hills. And it didn't look like any jungle you ever been on, but people in Nebraska don't know. So, you can make those movies at a lower budget, and you could get more people seeing them. They're just fun movies. And that's why they tapped into the post-70s paranoia and said, look, we're going to make movies fun again. And I think this Star Wars and this really launched that, movies are fun. They don't all have to be Taxi Driver. They don't all have to be Mean Streets. They don't all have to be these depressing Apocalypse Now kind of things where you can actually go to the movies and still have fun and enjoy yourself. And that's what Lucas and Spielberg do. Spielberg has gotten away from that, which is fine, because when he does he's doing a lot of relevant social issues and political issues. So I'm not upset that he is not doing as many action movies, but when he still does one, they're still fantastic.
Yeah. And I like specifically the use of practical effects in these movies has aged so well. I mean, even I'd say the most dated effects are maybe the face melting, but it still looks so cool. Like it doesn't, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter. Like it's supposed to be otherworldly, and it looks otherworldly, so it still fits in something like a lot. And that's a lot. That goes for a lot of movies in the 80s. I'd say the same thing about something like Beetlejuice or whatever, where it's more of the stop motion effect. How do you feel about the visual effects in this movie and the fact that we have that iconic opening sequence where there is no CGI or anything like that immediately starts you rolling your eyes?
I'm trying to think. There's very little CGI. There's some matte paintings, but there's no actual special effects. The tarantulas are real. The darts are real. The boulder was real. It was made out of fiberglass, but it was still real, and it still weighed a lot of money. I mean, it still weighed a lot, and it cost a lot of money. And had Harrison Ford not kept running, he would have been severely hurt. They had to build that flying wing that ran over his leg and tore a tendon. They had to actually get 7,000 snakes or snake-like animals. They didn't really use a lot of snakes. There's some kind of weird lizard that looks like a snake. But it was also the 80s, so in the very early 80s, so practical effects was how you went. And this kind of movie lends itself to practical effects quite well. I think the craziest thing in the movie is the truck scene where they're fighting on the truck and he gets towed underneath. And if you look real close, you can see how they did it. But because it's just like Jaws, where you don't see the shark for almost like 45 minutes to an hour. By the time you do, you already bought into the terror of Jaws, that when you see the big dumb rubber shark, if I showed you a picture of it out of context, you'd be like, yeah, that looks fake. But after sitting in the movies for an hour, you totally forget that that's a fake shark. And you totally forget that, Harrison Ford's sitting in a chair that just happens to be in the front of that truck. And yes, he's in a ditch being dragged under the car. You can see how it's done, but only if you take the time to look. The way they edit it, the way they do everything, they do it in such a way that it's so practical. It feels real. and it's perfect. It's that's how they should do it. And I think that's the problem with the movies in the early 2000s, and I think they're getting away from that. Is yes, CGI is important, but it needs to be tapered down with some practical effects. Because if something is real, people will believe it more, even if it's not true, even if it's a puppet. That's why they went back to a puppet Yoda for the sequels, because he looks more realistic. It's just it just does. The CGI stuff only should be used when you can't do anything else.
That's something that Spielberg in particular has really kept in mind throughout his career. I mean, look at something like Jurassic Park, which came out, 30 years ago and still looks better than Jurassic World as far as the dinosaurs and the terror that they invoke. And it's in a movie like this that's set in the jungle, it lends itself to that. But it's also the stunt work, and just it's like I think filmmakers often just forget that your movie is eternal. You're not going to see it. People aren't going to go see it in the theaters and then forget about it, especially now with streaming and everything. Like, people are going to rewatch those a million times, freeze frame them, scrutinize things and all of that. And the technology will evolve, but practical effects, if something's really there on set, it's really there. And you can still tell the difference. We mentioned earlier about the monkeys in Crystal Skull, which looked awful then. And it's been 12 years, so I imagine it looks even worse now. But this movie feels like it could have come out yesterday in large regard.
Yeah, and you could do it very similar than, because the stuff that you're talking about, you don't need any fantasy laser beams or spaceships. It's all practical because it's also based in the 40s, so you don't have to worry about all that.
Right.
So
absolutely.
It's such a well-crafted, and then the one thing we haven't talked about is the music.
Yep, I was going to get to that.
Because John Williams, the maestro, it's like he can do no wrong from 1970 to 1995. Not that he was doing wrong after that. It's just that there's so many iconic fanfares and movie music that everything was so great. And he can tempo it, because you the swelling music when he gets on that horse. God, it's you get excited for you, and an action scene's coming up, but that he's doing it for the right reasons because the music tells you he is. It's not just music just to be there to fill in the silence. It's so great. It gets tough to even talk about when it comes to music, because you have to listen to it. And it's one of those things that John Williams, he can play. He does music that you can just listen to. You don't have to watch a movie. You just listen to the music. The music's great on its own.
Yeah, that's why whenever I get the rare occasion they have Blu-rays or DVDs or whatever of movies that scored by John Williams where they have the music only track, I'm always like, oh yeah, we're going to do Superman. I mean, because if we talked right now and we did an episode on the top 10 most memorable movie themes of all time, like 7 of them would be John Williams. I was going to say 8 probably.
7 or 8 are going to be John Williams.
Star Wars, Indiana Jones, E.T., Superman, Jurassic Park. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy that the man is that prolific. And, I mentioned earlier about how I didn't see these movies that much. Obviously, the music was burned into my head. But even Temple of Doom, which I haven't seen probably now in at least 20 years, probably 25-ish, more like that. I can hum the main music from Temple of Doom because I had the video game of Temple of Doom on Nintendo. So I have that like etched in my brain, and that's John Williams again. So it's a huge part of this, kind of like, and the reason I keep bringing up Star Wars is that these two franchises are so interlinked by Lucas, by Ford, by Williams,
they have the same DNA. They are shared by the same that serial DNA. But Temple of Doom has the quintessential shot of Indiana Jones when that mine car comes up. He's all in shadow, and then you see him, and he's gonna get ready to punch people. Mm-hmm. And he's just, I mean, there's so many iconic pictures from Raiders, from Temple of Doom. I mean, they're posters, and it's just, and that's in the movie. That's the great part. It's in the movie, the poster. So it's one of those things where, yeah, I'm probably more susceptible to it because it did happen while I was 8, while I was 12, while my brain hadn't fully formed, and I was still being inundated with all this stuff. But as I get close to 50, I still look at it and I go back and I've seen some movies that don't hold up, and these still hold up. Jaws still holds up. God, Jaws is even more relevant now than ever.
Oh yeah, for sure. You mentioned the shots, and then I made a note of the very beginning, the very first shot of this movie. Like, yeah, I think there's something to be said for sure about seeing this at the right age and having it hit you in the nostalgia feels and all that decades later. But it is also objectively an incredibly well crafted movie. Like whether it's someone's bag or not, like whether it is a personal favorite or whatever, whether they see it now and they're just like, okay. It's so like well made in technically, from the cinematography to, like as we said, the score and the effects and stuff. But the first shot is the Paramount logo that dissolves into the mountain. And just even that, I was like, oh crap, I forgot. That's so cool. I forgot that's the first shot of this movie.
That's the shot of every movie of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Remember
it's true.
On the gong is Temple of Doom has the Paramount Mountain on the gong. And then they have it in Utah. That's right. They're in the desert of Utah, where one of the mountains looks like Paramount. And then this is why Crystal Skull sucks, is they've got a gopher hole or a prairie dog hole. That looks like
that's right. It is. It's like
that should have warned you right then when you see that. Like, this is going to be just a gopher hole of a movie. You're going to step in it, you're going to break your leg, and you're going to cry for an hour and a half until someone rescues you.
It should have just been like a pile of shit shaped like the Paramount Mountain.
I'm surprised they didn't do that from like Jurassic Park and just said, that's a big pile of shit.
Yeah.
Because it might as well have been. Hopefully, you got to have a iconic mountain of, but even though Paramount, I don't even know would they still be doing it? I don't know, because I think Disney owns it now.
Yeah, I think it just falls under the Lucasfilm banner. So yeah, I believe that it would still be the case. Who knows? When if the fifth one's going to happen, when it happens, it's supposed to. So we'll see. I mean, but yeah. So I wonder how that's going to work under Disney's ownership. But even just the opening sequence, obviously iconic, the boulder and all that. But like there's even me not having watched this movie all the way through for many, many years. I was like, oh, this is the part where he like rubs his chin and nervously as he gets the sand out of the bag and like tries to guess how much the idol weighs. And then you have Alfred Molina in the back, like rubbing his fingers in anticipation. Like all of that is just shot for shot, just so impressive. And it really gives you this sort of mythic introduction for Indy as you see the whip and he kind of emerges from the shadows and all of that.
Yeah, Alfred Molina's very first role on screen.
Mm-hmm.
He looks so young.
He really does.
But yeah, that's how it is. You're automatically dealing with someone who is calm, cool, and collected because you see he finds the poison darts. Then he's brushing off tarantulas. Then he's showing him the trap with the light, which I still don't understand how they have photosensitive traps in this thing. He's whipping across caverns and he's getting ready to steal this thing. And it's in true Indiana form. He screws up.
Mm-hmm.
He misjudges. It's too heavy. He runs, he gets out. And what happens at the very beginning? Belloc comes in and steals what's quote unquote rightfully Indiana Jones. And that is pretty much sums up the movie over and over again. We're going to constantly see he's going to escape. He's going to run. He's going to fly out of there, but he's constantly getting in and out of jams all the time, rarely succeeding, which is interesting for a hero.
Yeah. It's a microcosm of the whole movie. I think that's why I think you hit the nail on the head. That's why that sequence works so well. It tells you everything you need. Even just like you were saying, he knows about the trap. So obviously he's intelligent. He's well researched. He's very Batman-esque. And to go back to, our mention of the Pattinson movie that's the world's greatest detective. He has sort of that aspect to him too. But then he's human and he botches the whole thing. But yeah, that's it's an objectively great movie. It's not one that personally is like one of my favorite because I didn't have the same experience, but I think I understand why it is for so many people, why it is for you, and why it's considered such a classic. Just because there's so many pieces that had to fall perfectly in place for this movie to happen and to work as well as it does. And you have to tip your fedora in Indiana style to that.
Yeah, because the casting's great. Karen Allen wasn't well known, but she's perfect for this role. I mean, Harrison Ford was not supposed to be this. It was supposed to be Tom Selleck. There was a bunch of other people that they had auditioned for, and they only hired Harrison Ford 3 weeks before production. The music came out perfectly. The only thing that we knew was going to be good was Steven Spielberg's direction, and even then, we didn't know if he was going to be on time and under budget.
Right, exactly.
So a lot of things had to fall into place. But thankfully, just like Indiana Jones, he lucked into a lot of things. And yeah, maybe Crystal Skull is the final part where now he's running from a boulder because the franchise is now under attack from the mistake that he made.
That's true. Well, hopefully he can escape in the nick of time and go back to his archaeology job or his professor job with his tail between his legs. That's kind of the Indiana way, I guess.
He seems like he'd be the worst professor too.
He does. It feels like, I think my wife even asked me while we were watching, she's like, so is this his cover? And I was like, I think he's really a professor.
No, he's really a professor. This is what they did back in the 30s and 40s, right. Is that professors would teach because they could get the money to fund digs. And so it's kind of like you got to eat your vegetables before you can get to dessert. And the dig was dessert for them. So yeah, he right off the bat, he comes back and he's showing them the pieces that he got and they're going to sell them and that'll get money for the college. So him finding these relics for a museum is his way of making money. It is his job. And it's a way of financing more digs and also financing the college. He just happens to, on occasion, like we saw in Temple of Doom, make some mistakes where is it really archaeology or is it just grave robbing?
Yeah.
Because I do have a feeling that he has destroyed several historical sites and just for a gold trinket. So, but that is also how they did archaeology back in the early 1900s. Is it wasn't really about preserving the site. It was getting all the gold and riches. It was fortune and glory.
He seems so buttoned up and so uncomfortable in the classroom too. I think that's probably part of why my wife was like, "Why is this like his thing?" Because he doesn't seem like he seems out of his element. And you, like you said, he just like, okay, let me get through this so I can go and go on another adventure. I hate this crap. Go ahead.
That's why he's sneaking out of his office in the Last Crusade because he has to teach so he can do everything else. And he doesn't want to. I think the only thing that he gets a benefit from it is there's a hint that he might be sleeping with some students. That girl with the "I love you" on her eyebrow. I don't think that was let me just try this. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to just try this. I think that's probably one of his. Okay, I've been hitting on her for a while. Now she's finally saying yeah. And because I know that first scene with Marcus Brody where they discuss him leaving and he's packing his bags and he's in this robe. He is supposed to have had a girl at his house at that time. That was supposed to be the situation. That's why he's dressed that way.
Right.
And so I have a feeling if Marion is any indication that he's probably a professor that sleeps with his students, he's probably a little bit of a drinker and he will bend the law when it's necessary.
I love that the movie acknowledges the fact that Harrison Ford is teaching the class, and which is why it's like 95% girls that are in love with him.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm like, if Harrison Ford taught at my school, I understand. Like, I get it. He's a good looking guy. So I understand why everybody like, look at this guy. He's so dreamy. And the whole, like, it pans across the class and it's almost all young women kind of gazing up at him. Like, I don't care what he say. Look at how beautiful he is. Yeah. I thought it's funny that the movie acknowledges that.
Oh, sure. And that makes perfect sense too. He's that good-looking young teacher, though he's not that young. He's in his 30s. But he's that good-looking, rugged teacher that all the girls flock to. And maybe his class was easy too, because if he wasn't there a lot, maybe he got a reputation of, he's going to pass you. Just show up.
Yeah, exactly. Is there anything about Raiders of the Lost Ark that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we mention before we start winding down?
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I could go on forever, and I don't want to do that. No, we talked about Harry. We talked about Steven. Like, I know these guys. We talked about Sala, how he got shafted. We talked about Marion. We talked about the music. We talked about the editing with the stunts. There's really not much. We did not talk about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
We did not.
Which were actually not bad for what they were. They were television. And so you have to take that as different. There's different expectations for television than they are for movies. And in that, it was almost like Forrest Gump. He was meeting historical figures every week. But that was the goal of the show. And I thought they were great. I do remember the episode Harrison Ford showed up in because it was a night of a blizzard in my hometown, and we lived just outside of town, and so we had an antenna. This is before cable, and so it kept on going out, and they kept on interrupting the show with weather updates. So I kept on getting mad because I knew Harrison Ford was finally on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and they kept on interrupting it with weather announcements, and I missed most of it, so that means I had to wait for a rerun.
Oh man.
But that was when he was doing The Fugitive, because he had the fugitive beard on, and he learned that he could play the flute. It was a really weird episode.
Yeah, he kept talking about not how he didn't kill his wife, and everyone was like, "What is he talking about?" Totally out of context.
I did not kill my wife. The finger of doom. We didn't talk about that, but yeah, that's Harrison Ford's famous finger. I did have a chance to actually meet Harrison Ford. So,
oh wow, I
met him on the set of Random Hearts in New York City. I had just moved to New York City in 1998. It was about October. I think it was October, September. And I went out walking the neighborhood because I just moved there like a week before. So I didn't have a job. I didn't know the neighborhood. And I noticed they had a sign on the light pole that the street was closed for filming, because that's what they do. They posted. And I just snuck past the rope and I walked down the thing. And all of a sudden there is a film crew. And there's Sidney Pollack directing at Video Village. And I had lunch with Dennis Haysbert and Charles S. Dutton. And then Harrison Ford, chomping on a cigar, walked by. And I'm like, Mr. Ford, can I get your autograph? And he signed my daytimer, which I still have on the wrong day. He signed it on the wrong day, but I have, because I just opened it up. I wasn't expecting. And we talked about Mosquito Coast for a minute, and which is actually my favorite Harrison Ford performance. And it was fantastic. I hope I had a chance to meet him just to say thank you, because from what I understand, he's not always the nicest guy. He's a little bit of a grumpy curmudgeon, but to me, he was fantastic. And so, yeah, it was great. And I got to meet John Rhys Davies as well, Sala. He was a sweetheart. Oh, wow. So my experience with everybody from Indiana Jones that I've met, all nice people.
That's good
Karen
to hear.
Karen Allen's a sweetheart. I haven't met her, but I know people who have met her. She's wonderful. Unfortunately, Marcus Brody's passed. Sean Connery doesn't go out in public unless you go to Bermuda. I don't have anything. I mean, I know
Alfred
that
Molina is out there somewhere, and
Alfred Molina is a great guy.
Paul Freeman's still around?
Yeah, is who?
Paul Freeman. Is he still around?
Oh, Paul Freeman. Yeah, he was in Hot Fuzz, or wasn't he in?
He was in Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, but
I shockingly, whenever I see his name, I was like, wait a minute. Wasn't that Ivan Ooze in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie? Because I was like, that movie came out on my 12th birthday, and I was really into Power Rangers at the time.
Yeah, you're a different generation.
I know. See, that's a movie that I've seen in the last few years. Like, wow, this sucks. I mean, I like it for nostalgic reasons, but like, not a great film. But he's the best thing in it because he's hamming it up, and you really playing like to the back of the room with how over the top and ridiculous his performance is. But he's a lot of fun in that.
What next? I think we got everything covered. I think we
did. Yeah. I think we covered pretty much, did like a nice swath of coverage on Raiders of the Lost Ark, or Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, as it's been retitled. How do you feel about Lucas and his retitling?
Nah, you know what? As long as he doesn't swap out the guns for walkie-talkies like he did with E.T., right? Spielberg did. Then he swapped them back. He said that was stupid.
Yeah, you made a mistake, guys.
Yeah, the only thing they've ever done for touch-up, because Lucas does like to go back. The only thing they've ever done for touch-up is when they re-released it on Blu-ray. They took the reflection of Harrison Ford's face and the snake out, because if you remember,
plexiglass.
The plexiglass, you can see it. You could always see the snake's reflection, and you could also see a little bit of Harrison's reflection in it. and they did digitally remove that. But that's the only thing, because there's nothing to take out of that movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that the title, the retitling or whatever, I think
just consistency.
It's exactly. I was just about to say. Part of me is like, okay, good. Now they all have Indiana Jones. I'm like a stickler for consistency in some regards. So I'm like, okay, that's not so bad. It's just prefacing it with Indiana Jones and so like the other films. But Craig Price, if there is nothing else, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Well, I am at Matinee Heroes everywhere. So matineeheroes.com, Matinee Heroes on Twitter, Matinee Heroes on Instagram. Our show, Cast Off, is the game show that we do. You can find that at matineeheroes.com/castoff. It's on YouTube, but we haven't got the magical custom URL yet because we're working on that. It's just something that I've been experimenting with during the COVID. It was actually something I would do at conventions because I moderate at a lot of Comic-Cons. And one of the things that I was offering this year, I know it was accepted to about 5 of them until they got canceled, was we were going to take the recasting as a competition live where the audience could vote on it. And so when that dissolved, I said, let's take it online and see if we can do it there. And so that's what we've been doing. So hopefully we'll be doing it live at a convention near you, but we will continue on. I think we're going to reevaluate, see what we did right, what we did wrong, and maybe relaunch season 2 in the next couple of weeks.
Cool. Very exciting. Well, thank you so much for bringing Raiders of the Lost Ark to the table. It was a good chance for me to go back and rewatch it. My wife and I actually have a list of movies that we've been meaning to watch together, and this was on that list, so I finally got the chance to cross that off. So thank you for getting me the chance to go back and rewatch that. And
how did your wife like it?
She likes it okay. I mean, she hadn't seen it, period, which I was like, how did you not see it at all? Like, I mean, maybe it was a kid a long time ago, something, but she's the same age as me. So I was just surprised that she hadn't seen it at all. She, like me, was more grew up with Last Crusade and like seeing that around. Because again, kind of like, we were 8 when this came out. We were 6 when Last Crusade came out. So that was like right in our age range. But yeah, so she liked it, okay. It didn't really, I feel like this movie in particular, it really does, not that it relies so much on nostalgia, but when you see a movie like this that has been so influential decades later, you've seen every other version of it, it loses its freshness a little bit. And that's unfortunate, but it just, I think, is a testament to how much how much this movie changed cinema and changed the way these kinds of movies were approached.
Well, I really thank you for letting me come on and talk about it for way too long.
That's what we do here. We always run long. It's all good.
But I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome back anytime. We'll have to come up with something else to talk about.
I can probably do that. We can do another. We do Witness. How's that? We can talk about Amish people for 2 hours.
You never know. Hey, that will work. Thanks, Craig. If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.